Snow moved like restless spirits across the open plains, drifting in long white ribbons that scraped against the battered fence posts and the blackened silhouettes of winter-killed sage. Dawn had not fully broken. Instead, a pale, bruised light leaked over the distant ridges, illuminating the world in a cold, unforgiving hush. The rancher, Elias Bracken, rode through that silence as if it were a grave he had dug himself into long ago. His coat, heavy with frost, clung to him like a burden he had carried so long he no longer felt its weight. His horse's breath steamed in slow, ghostly pulses, the only warmth in miles of frozen emptiness. Elias looked as though he had been carved from the land itself, weathered, scarred, and unyielding, but there was a hollowness in his eyes that told a different story. A man once full of fire now reduced to the quiet cinders of existence. Somewhere behind those mountains, a war had ended years ago. But inside him, it still rumbled. He gripped the reins tighter as the wind cut across his face, slicing open the old memory that always arrived this time of year. A flash, cradling a small pair of boots in his calloused hands. A voice, laughing, warm. Then silence, the kind that never truly left. The storm had hit during the night. Not violent, just relentless, steady, heavy enough to swallow trails and make men question their sense of direction. But Elias pushed on, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant sinking deeper into the quiet places he feared most. His horse halted without warning. Elias followed its gaze. A thin plume of smoke twisted upward from behind a ridge, faint and wavering like a dying candle flame. No ranchers lived that way, not anymore. Fire destroyed the Miller cabin 3 winters ago. Coyotes had taken over the old field. The wind carried only ashes and stories from that direction. Yet someone, something, had lit a fire. Elias felt the pinch deep in his gut. Trouble rarely announced itself this politely. He dismounted, the crunch of snow under his boots swallowed by the thick stillness. He moved slow, instinct telling him the same thing it always did on strange mornings: danger is quieter than you expect. He climbed the ridge, each step careful, breath shallow. Then he saw them. A wagon, broken at one wheel, leaned pitifully in the snow. The horse that had pulled it was nowhere, its tracks scattered wildly, as though spooked. The fire was small, barely alive, but enough to cast a trembling glow over 2 small figures huddled beside it. Twin girls, no older than 7, wrapped in threadbare shawls and bravery far too big for the tiny frames. And beside them, a woman stretched on the frozen ground, unmoving. Her skin pale, her lips blue. Snowflakes collected on her lashes like frost on a forgotten statue. Elias felt something inside him plunge, deep, sharp, undeniable. The nearest town was 20 miles away. No one should have survived a night like this. The girls looked up at the sound of his steps. Not startled, just exhausted, as if fear had been wrung out of them long before he arrived. The slightly older of the 2 stood, swaying on shaky legs. Her shoes were wet, toes peeking through the leather. She had her sister's hand in a tight grasp, protective as a mother wolf. Her small voice cracked the frozen morning. "Sir, do you know where Santa goes, after Christmas?" Elias froze, not because of the question, but because of the fragile hope behind it. A hope that shouldn't exist for children sitting beside a dying fire and a dying body. He stepped closer, kneeling. The snow clung to his knees. "Where's your father?" he asked quietly. We were going to find him," the girl whispered. "Mama said he went ahead. But Mama got sick. She told us to stay warm until morning." Her eyes drifted to the body. Elias swallowed the ache rising up his throat. He had seen men fall on battlefields, seen bodies broken by stampedes and storms, but nothing struck like the stillness of a mother lying beside her children. Before he could speak, the younger girl approached him clutching something in her mittenless hand, a folded piece of paper, edges crumpled, covered in faint pencil marks. She held it toward him with trembling fingers. "Mama said, if we met a grown-up, someone kind, we should give this to him." She blinked hard, fighting tears and cold. She said, maybe he could pass it along to Santa. Elias took the paper slowly, as if touching it might unravel the last thread holding these children together. He didn't open it, not yet. The cold wind surged suddenly, forcing the fire to bow low. The girls shivered violently, and instinct, something long buried, rose in him like an old stallion waking. He stripped off his own coat, thick and lined with wolf fur from years past. He wrapped it around both of them, lifting one child against his chest, then the other, tucking them into his warmth as naturally as if he had done it 1,000 times. Their tiny hands clutched his shirt, desperate for heat, for safety, for something familiar in a world that had just broken. Elias glanced once more at the woman on the ground. Her face peaceful now, as though her final worry had been replaced with trust in him. He lifted the girls higher, securing them with his arms. "Hold on," he murmured softly. "It's a long ride." They nodded weakly, their cheeks pressed against him, breath trembling. As he began down the ridge, the younger girl whispered, "Sir, will Santa read our letter?" Elias hesitated. Through the fog in the cold air, he stared out toward his ranch, the lonely place he had built to keep the world out, not let it in. He answered only when the silence between them grew heavy. "I'll make sure he gets it." But inside, a storm he hadn't felt in years began to churn, alive and dangerous. The girls were warm against his chest. The letter crinkled in his pocket. And somewhere behind him, the wind dragged across the body of a woman who had given her last breath to see her children survive. By the time Elias reached his horse, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel. The storm that had eased through the night now gathered itself for something fiercer. Snow whipped across the plains in sudden bursts, stinging their faces as he mounted the saddle with the girls clinging to him. His ranch lay far across the frozen land. He had food, heat, and shelter. He also had memories that clawed at him in ways the children could not see. He rode fast, leaning forward, shielding them from the cutting wind. But with every mile, he felt the question echo again. Why were they out here alone? Where was the father they were searching for? And what was written in the letter pressed against his heart? The ranch appeared ahead, dark logs, long shadows, smoke trickling faintly from the chimney. A lonely fortress on the edge of nowhere. A place built for one man's grief. Not for two freezing children carrying a dead mother's last hope. As he approached the door, he realized something unsettling. Taking them in meant more than shelter. It meant opening the door he had kept locked for years. And someone, old and dangerous was waiting just beyond the horizon. The storm was coming, but not the one outside. The one he had been running from. The fire inside Elias's cabin cracked softly, its glow spreading across the wooden floorboards like a slow sunrise. The warmth filled the room in gentle waves, melting the frost from the children's hair and thawing the stiffness in their tiny hands. The girls sat wrapped together in Elias's thick wool blanket on the long bench near the hearth, their eyes heavy but alert, as if sleep itself was a luxury they weren't sure they were allowed. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls with a low, unbroken moan. The land was disappearing under another veil of snow. Elias moved with quiet purpose, setting water to boil, pulling down jars of dried venison, stacking more logs on the fire, but his mind churned restlessly beneath the surface. He felt the letter in his pocket every time he shifted his weight. It was like a pulse, pounding against his ribs, demanding attention he wasn't ready to give. The girls watched him but said nothing. They had the solemn gaze of children who had already lived through something too big for their age. Elias knelt beside them when he finally handed them each a cup of broth. Steam curled up into their faces, softening the tightness around their eyes. They drank in small sips at first, then faster as the warmth sank into them. The gratitude was silent but palpable. "How long were you out there?" Elias asked, keeping his voice low, as if any louder sound might crack the fragile calm in the room. The older twin, he'd learned her name was Leela, shrugged lightly, though her hands trembled. "Since yesterday morning, maybe. Mama said we had to keep moving." The younger one, May, rested her head against her sister's shoulder, eyes half closed. "It was so cold," she whispered. The wind sounded like someone crying. Elias looked away toward the window. Snowflakes dashed themselves against the glass like tiny white birds desperate for shelter. He had heard that cry before, the wind wailing across open plains, blowing through the boards of a cabin that had once echoed with laughter. The memory burrowed under his skin with cold fingers. He stood abruptly, needing movement. The girls didn't flinch, not because they weren't frightened, but because they seemed too tired to hold fear anymore. Elias crossed to the table, pulled out the letter, and stared at it. Light from the fire flickered over the pencil marks showing through the paper. The handwriting was uneven but earnest, a child's determination pressed into every curve. He hesitated. Opening it felt like stepping into a promise he hadn't agreed to make. But he unfolded it anyway. 2 small drawings filled the page, simple but heartbreaking in their clarity. The first was of a family, a mother, a father, and two little girls. All holding hands, all smiling. The second was a house with smoke rising from the chimney. A place that looked nothing like the ruined wagon or the lonely trail where he'd found them. A place built of dreams and hope. At the bottom, in clumsy block letters, were the words, "Dear Santa, bring Papa home." Quote, the words tightened something deep inside Elias's chest, twisting it until breathing became effort. He had once prayed for something so simple. A return, a miracle, a promise kept. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his pocket before the girls could see the storm it stirred in him. The fire popped. A log cracked down the middle. Leela's voice drifted toward him, small but steady. Mama said Papa wasn't gone forever. She said he was looking for work. But people in town told us. She hesitated, her throat tightening. May whispered the rest. They said he might not come back. Elias felt the room shift, just a fraction, just enough for the truth to slip closer. The frontier was full of men who left one winter and never returned the next. Men swallowed by mines, by debts, by alcohol, by violence. Men who started over somewhere else with new names and new lies. Still, he didn't say that. Instead, he asked, "Did your mother say where he went?" Leela nodded. North, toward the timber camps. Elias exhaled through his nose. Those camps were a maze of rough men and rougher work, danger at every turn. If their father was alive, he was buried in a place where no child should follow. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound of the wind intensified, rattling the shutters with sharp, impatient hands. The storm outside had grown teeth. Elias crossed to the door and drew the heavy iron bar across it, securing it against the coming white fury. As he leaned his weight against the wood, his eyes drifted to the rifle hanging on the wall. Instinct made him track the storm's howl with an old soldier's caution. But it wasn't the weather that pricked at the back of his neck. It was the memory of the wagon wheel tracks leading south, fresh before the morning snowfall. Someone else had been out there. Someone who meant harm, or brought trouble with them. He turned slowly. The girls were falling asleep against each other, their faces soft and unguarded in the firelight. He moved them gently to the bed he had slept in for years, alone, untouched by warmth or laughter. He tucked them under thick quilts, letting the softness swallow their small forms. They clutched the fabric instinctively, sinking into the safety it offered. Elias pulled a chair beside them and watched until their breathing deepened. In the quiet, the cabin seemed smaller, more vulnerable. Shadows clung to the corners like secrets waiting to step forward. His thoughts drifted, not to the war, not to the grave he'd dug with his own hands years ago, but to the plume of smoke he'd seen near the ridge. To the broken wagon wheel. To the missing horse tracks. To the smell of another fire on the wind. Someone else had been close. Too close. He flexed his hands, feeling the old ache in his knuckles, injuries earned long before the ranch, long before solitude. Injuries earned in battles fought under lawless skies. Footsteps in the snow echoed in his memory. He rose quietly, grabbed his rifle, and stepped outside. Cold slammed into him like a fist. The world was a blur of white, the storm rising in swirling sheets that clawed at his coat and stung his eyes. The wind carried a scent, smoke, faint but present. Not his own. He scanned the horizon, eyes sharp despite the fury of the snow. Visibility was poor, but there, far off, he caught a flicker of orange. Too distant to be from his cabin. Too deliberate to be natural. A campfire, set by someone who either didn't fear the storm, or didn't fear being found. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. His jaw tightened. He knew that fire, or rather, he knew the kind of men who made fires like that. Men who didn't hide because hiding was for those who felt guilt or shame. Men who walked the frontier like it owed them something. Men who had once torn through towns looking for anyone too weak to defend themselves. Men who might have crossed paths with a wagon carrying a woman and two children. A cold thought sliced through him. Maybe the mother hadn't died from sickness. He closed the door against the howl of the storm, but it couldn't keep out the unease crawling beneath his skin. Inside, the fire glowed steady and warm. The girls slept peacefully, unaware of the danger tightening its grip around them. Elias sat by the table, rifle across his knees, staring at the letter once more. Bring Papa home. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, something darker stirred. The land was too quiet. The tracks he'd seen were too fresh. And the fire on the horizon burned too deliberately. The past he had buried was rising again, wearing new boots, carrying new threats, but fueled by the same merciless hunger. As he sat in that small cabin, guarding 2 children who had no one else left, Elias Bracken realized one thing with cold certainty. The storm they feared wasn't the one outside. The real one was coming for them. And he knew exactly who it belonged to. The storm eased just before dawn, leaving the world washed in a heavy, breathless quiet, as if the land itself were waiting for something to break. Elias had not slept. He sat in the dim cabin with his rifle across his lap, the fire burning low behind him. Shadows stretched across the floorboards like long fingers. The twins slept curled together beneath thick quilts, their small chests rising and falling with peaceful, trusting breaths. They had no idea what moved through the snow outside. No idea whose footsteps now circled the perimeter of the ranch with slow, deliberate intent. Elias heard them long before anyone knocked. Metal scraping, hooves shifting, the low murmur of voices trying not to carry. Men who knew how to move in silence. Men who waited for a crack, a mistake, a weakness. He rose from the chair like a statue coming to life. The knock came, soft, mocking. A voice followed, muffled but unmistakable. "Bracken, you alive in there?" Elias felt his jaw harden. The name he hadn't heard in years scraped across him like a hot brand. It was a name he'd buried deep in blood and regret. Another voice chimed in, this one arrogant, laughing under his breath. "Man's probably got himself company. Tracks said he found those little birds." Elias's fingers tightened around the rifle. He moved to the window and, through a narrow gap in the shutter, saw 3 figures on horseback. Snow coated their hats and coats, but he knew their kind, the way they sat the saddle like they owned the land, weapons slung low, eyes sweeping for vulnerability. Bounty riders, drifters, wolves in human skin, and he knew exactly which pack they belonged to. The leader, Rourke, sat with one hand resting casually on the handle of his revolver. A scar carved down his cheek like the mark of a blade someone had meant to finish deeper. His gaze flicked to the door again. "Bracken," he called, louder this time. "We just need to talk." A lie. The kind men told right before they burned everything down. Elias stepped back from the window. The twins stirred under the blankets, sensing the shift in the air. Leela blinked up at him, confusion clouding her soft features. "What's happening?" Elias crouched beside the bed, keeping his voice low, steady. "I need you two to stay under the blankets. No matter what you hear. No matter what happens. Do you understand?" May nodded, though fear trembled around her eyes. Elias tucked the quilts around him tightly, creating a cocoon of warmth and silence. He brushed a strand of hair from Leela's forehead, then stood and moved to the door. He didn't open it. He spoke through the wood. "Ride on, Rourke. There's nothing for you here." A laugh rolled across the porch, light and cruel. "See, that's where you're wrong. We came looking for a woman and 2 kids. Looks like we found their trail. Now we just want what we're owed." Elias felt something inside him snap, not loudly, but clean, decisive. Like a bone that had healed wrong finally being set into place. The truth slid cold into his blood. These men had been following the wagon. They weren't searching for survivors. They were searching for property. A debt owed, or a revenge long held. Or something darker still. Elias pulled the iron bar from the door and cracked it open just enough to meet Rourke's eyes. The man smiled, slow and poisonous. "Well now," he drawled, "you look like you've seen a ghost. Or maybe you're hiding one." Elias stepped onto the porch. Snow gave under his boots with a muffled crunch. Rourke's gaze drifted to the rifle resting easy in Elias's hands. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We just want the girls. They belong to someone who's willing to pay a pretty penny for their return." Elias's grip tightened. Girls did not belong to anyone. "Turn around," he said. "Ride north. Forget the trail." Rourke's grin sharpened. "Or what?" Elias didn't answer with words. He lifted his rifle. Rourke didn't flinch. Instead, he clicked his tongue softly, like scolding a stubborn horse. "You really think you're the only man out here who knows how to shoot?" The man to Rourke's right shifted his coat, revealing a sawed-off shotgun strapped to his thigh. The third man pulled a rifle from its saddle scabbard, leveling it slow and steady. Elias inhaled once, steadying the storm inside him. He stepped down from the porch, snow swirling around his boots. The air crackled with the promise of violence, a fragile, electric hush just waiting for a spark. It came suddenly, not from Elias, but from the cabin, a sharp thud, a gasp, a child's cry, quick, small, impossible to suppress. May. Elias's heart stabbed the inside of his ribs. Rourke's eyes lit with cold triumph. There they are, he whispered. The shotgun rider swung his weapon toward the cabin door. Elias fired first. The rifle thundered so loud the birds shook from the trees. The shotgun wielder flew backward off his horse, arms flailing, snow erupting beneath him. Rourke reacted instantly, drawing his revolver and diving behind a fence post as the third rider sped toward the porch. Elias fired again, missed by an inch as the rider ducked low. Shots exploded in rapid succession. Bark splintered, snow flew, horses screamed and reared. The air burned with gunpowder, hot and thick. Elias moved like a man possessed, not reckless, but sharp, deliberate. Every motion honed through years of battle he'd never spoken of. He vaulted behind a trough as bullets shattered the post where his head had been seconds earlier. Rourke's voice boomed through the chaos. Don't kill him. Bring him in breathing. They want him too. Elias's blood went cold. Who wanted him? Before the question even took shape, he fired again, striking the third rider in the shoulder. The man toppled sideways, rolling in the snow with a strangled cry. Then silence, just the wind, and Rourke, standing alone now, snow caked on his coat, revolver still smoking. Elias rose slowly, rifle cocked, breath fogging in hard bursts. Rourke spoke first, voice steady despite the carnage. You can't protect them. Men with deeper pockets than you or me want those children. Their old man crossed the wrong people. Their payment, collateral. Elias's jaw locked. No child is collateral. Rourke shrugged. Out here, everything is. He raised his revolver. Elias didn't hesitate. He fired. Rourke staggered back, dropped his gun, and fell to his knees. Blood spread across the snow like spilled ink. His breath hitched, visible in fading puffs. You don't know what's coming, he rasped. You think this ends here? They'll keep hunting. They'll burn this place to the ground. Elias stepped closer. Rourke's gaze flicked up at him, fear and certainty twisted together. You should have stayed dead, Bracken. The last breath rattled out of him, drifting into the storm like smoke. Silence dropped again, heavy, total. Elias exhaled shakily, lowering the rifle. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the knowledge that the past he had tried to bury had just clawed its way back into the light. Whatever he thought he left behind was coming for him now, relentless and merciless. He turned toward the cabin. The door cracked open. Two small faces peeked out, eyes wide and glistening. Leela clutched May protectively, but both looked at him as if trying to understand the man who had just fought an army of ghosts for them. Elias wiped the blood from his cheek with the back of his glove and approached slowly. He knelt in front of the door, breath fogging the air between them. You're safe, he whispered. May stepped forward and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck, trembling. Leela followed, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. He held them both, letting their warmth sink into him, letting the storm inside him soften just enough for truth to break through. They weren't just passengers in his care anymore. They were under his protection. And he had made enemies powerful enough to wipe entire towns from maps. He stood with the girls in his arms, stepping inside, closing the door. The cabin felt smaller now. Not because danger was outside, but because two lives depended on him. Later, when the girls slept again and the fire dimmed into glowing embers, Elias sat alone at the table. He unfolded the letter one more time. Bring Papa home, he whispered into the quiet. I don't know if I can bring him home. His voice cracked, but I can keep you safe. Outside, the horizon darkened, storm clouds gathering not from weather, but from men who wanted payment in blood. Elias knew what he had to do. He would not wait for them to come. He would ride first. He would take the twins north, toward the camps, toward their father if he lived, toward answers, revenge, survival. This was not the end of the story. Only the spark. A voice seemed to whisper in the back of his mind, an old one he'd forgotten, warm and steady. Even in the darkest valley, a single ember can light the way. He closed his eyes, letting the mantra settle into his bones. When dawn came, he would ride. Not as a broken man, but as a protector, a reckoning, a storm of his own. And for those listening to this story, those carrying wounds no one sees, the ember still burns. If this story reached a place inside you that the world has forgotten, share your voice, share your scars, let them be heard, because sometimes the smallest spark is the one that saves everything.